Johnson said to the nation on the 23rd of March.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households, that is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home. That's all.
So they were the rules of the game. They were pretty clear. Here is Dominic Cummings, or a brief part of Dominic Cummings this evening explaining his journey.
The regulations describe various exceptional circumstances where it may not be possible to follow the rules. It doesn't say you must stay at home in all circumstances. It says that there are some circumstances in which you won't be able to follow these rules. And it seemed to me that I was in such an exceptional circumstance and I was trying to balance all of these very complicated things. So I think as I've said, I think I behaved reasonably in all of these given all the circumstances and the different things I had to try and weigh up.
So what Dominic Cummings is referring to there is a paragraph in the guidance which says, if you are living with children, keep following the advice to the best of your ability. However, we are aware that this would not always be possible. So that's what Dominic Cummings is falling back on. He is saying that his wife wasn't feeling very well. He feared he'd become unwell. Who was going to look after their 4-year-old? I know, I've got a niece 260 miles away who's volunteered to do it. That is the reason that he went up to Durham. That's the reason we've been given for him going up to Durham. Is that absolutely, literally a strict breach of the rules? It's questionable. I think when it comes to the trip to Barnard Castle, that was the most extraordinary part of it, where he said that he was worried about, he was going to drive back to London, but he was worried about his eyesight. So he put his wife and kid in the car and went for a drive for half an hour to see whether his eyesight was okay. Well, I would have thought if you're worried about your eyesight, the last thing you do is put them in the car. And it just so happened on that journey that the little lad wanted to stop for a comfort break. Didn't need one all the way from London up to Durham, because they never stopped apparently on the way up. And while they were there, they just happened to find there was a nice river there, and they sat down beside it. Look, that isn't credible or believable in any way at all. And look, from the start of this, I've said if people want to go out into the fresh air, into the countryside and social distance, I'm not personally very bothered about it. But if you're the people making the rules and insisting the rest of the country effectively is not allowed to do those things, it puts you in a very difficult position. I thought he was calm. I thought he was in control. I thought he was considerably politer than perhaps I would have expected. He clearly is in breach of the rules. Is that enough for him as an unelected advisor to be got rid of? I'll tell you what I will say. The one group of people who've come out of today quite badly are the media pack. And I think some of the scenes outside his house in London will almost have made people feel a bit sorry for Cummings and the kind of siege under which he's living. It is clear that Boris Johnson wants to stick with him. It is clear that there are many, not all, but many in the Remain camp particularly, who would like to see the back of him, who think Cummings going now may well aid them in getting us to extend, beyond the end of this year, staying within the EU rulebook. Has he done enough to convince you? He hasn't. Well, look, I don't think he's 100% telling the truth, but I don't necessarily think what he's done is a capital offence. That's my view. You tell me yours. 0345 6060 973. Let's find out, what do the great British public think? What do they make of that extraordinary bank holiday press conference? Let's go to Will in Camberwell. Will, good evening.
Good evening. I definitely agree with you about the veracity of what he's saying. He's had a long time to think up his story. I'm not accusing him of lying necessarily, but he's had a lot of time to get his story straight. As people used to say, if the headmaster summons you, before you get there, you've got to get your story straight.
Oh, I know all about that, Will. It's a few years ago, but yeah, I remember.
When I was at a comprehensive, so it was pretty bog standard then, but yeah, you've got to get your story straight. His story sounded pretty straight. What I found the most interesting was people have a go at the mainstream media often. The mainstream media have to obey various rules. These include Ofcom rules, where offering a right to reply on pretty much any story you do is just bog standard. So when he's there disclaiming various media stories, they would have often, if not, dare I say, every time, sought a right to reply, a comment from the office, and they never got one. So to now say, it was inaccurate, I think that's playing to the scepticism of what people perhaps think about the media, and that doesn't do journalists enough credit.
Well, I mean, there's a bit of a war going on here, Will, isn't there, between Cummings and the media? So, we know that. He absolutely loathes and detests them, and vice versa. On balance, I mean, Will, he's not elected, but he is very, very important. Do you feel
he's like the Emperor Palpatine to Anakin Skywalker, Boris Johnson? Personally, not that I'm a massive Star Wars fan, but that's the analogy I draw. What I thought was most revealing in the entire occasion, Nigel, and I don't know what you think about this, but he talked about how he was he didn't say expert, he said he knew a pandemic was a concern. He had seen reported, written about it, I think he said.
He did.
Towards the end of last year, and you think, despite that, we were late to defending ourselves as a country against the pandemic with
there was
a list of fatalities. How did that happen?
There was a very, very good piece written, by Dominic Lawson a few weeks ago in one of the newspapers, in which he said, "What a pity Cummings didn't follow his own advice." Will, very quickly, would he stay in office?
I think he probably will. I think he's not a member of the party, but he's got this magic hold over the Prime Minister, and there's very little chance waning after the interview of him disappearing.
Well, all depends on public reaction, I think. Will, thank you. Paul in Lowestoft is a new caller. Good evening, Paul.
Hello, Nigel. Yeah, just one thing has to do with the media, actually.
Yep.
I watched that thing a couple of days ago where the media were like hounding them round the car.
Yes, awful.
I did, yes. And you're supposed to be 2,000 millimetres away.
They weren't, were they?
They weren't even 2 millimetres. So are they going to all resign themselves as well? So I think they should. They've broke the rules.
Well, I did mention this a moment ago, Paul. I think, those media scenes outside his house. I mean, I know it happens, and listen, I've been through it myself, but it is all pretty unseemly. It almost makes the public go on his side. When he gave his account, I mean, Paul, do you think he was in breach of the spirit of the lockdown rules?
I think obviously family comes first, us first most or whatever, and up to a point, yes, he said, and there's that Scottish Prime Minister said he travelled halfway down the country. Well, 250 miles isn't halfway down the country, it's about a third. And also, does it matter if you're in a car, and he's got a posh car, so he's totally sealed, does it matter if that's 2 miles or 200 miles? He ain't got a
Yeah, it does actually, Paul. If he thought he was imminently going to get COVID-19, he may well have been taken ill en route. I don't know. Paul, do you want him to stay? Do you want him to go?
If he's good at his job, I want him to stay. It's all about what he can do for the government.
Fair enough, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Mary says, Dominic Cummings needs to go. There are plenty of people who've had symptoms with young children who had no one near them to help to go to. Mary, he was in a privileged position and he wanted to lock down and perhaps be ill in County Durham and not in London. That's the choice he was privileged enough to be able to make. Let's go to John in Eastbourne. John, I bet it's lovely there today.
It is, Nigel. I mean, if I can say straight away, Nigel, my only real sympathies for Dominic Cummings is the fact he was, obviously trying to get Brexit through.
Yep.
But that's as far as my sympathy goes for the man. I mean, in his statement, the statement he made today was bordering on being totally pathetic and inadequate. And this was coming from a man we're told our Prime Minister can't possibly survive without. And that's why he needs him as a chief advisor. What I would say, Nigel, we all know that if you feel you're physically incapacitated to drive, it's a criminal offence to get in a car.
this is...
And Dominic Cummings has been saying his eyesight was bad, he couldn't stand up, and then he gets in a car with his wife and his child, and he's prepared to drive 260 miles. So I think really and truly there's so many pitfalls, in his statement. I think the man should go, to be honest.
All right, John, thank you very much indeed. Very strong views, both sides, but he has convinced some people, and this was the line the Prime Minister was really putting up there last night. Mr. Cummings was doing what was best for his family. I don't think he needed to do a press conference. I'm surprised at you, Nigel. The same people that came after you during Brexit are now attacking Cummings. You should sympathise, not criticise. I have sympathised quite a lot tonight about the way the President behaved outside his house. All I'm saying is that when he says that he has no regrets and doesn't believe he broke the rules in any way, frankly, that is not of itself wholly believable. I don't believe it's a capital offence. I think a little bit more contrition might have been useful, but it's not really within his nature. This is the Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:15 on Bank Holiday Monday. Time for the news headlines with Thomas Watts.
Dominic Cummings has sought to defend his journey from London to Durham during the coronavirus lockdown, saying it was made in exceptional circumstances. Labour says it's clear there's one rule for Boris Johnson's closest advisor, another for everybody else. A further 121 people have died in the UK after testing positive for COVID-19, taking the total to 36,914. Cloud and patchy rain in northern and central areas tonight, clear spells elsewhere, a low of 4 Celsius.
LBC Travel, I'm Anne-Marie Walsh. In Thurrock, the A13 remains closed eastbound at the M25, junction 30 for Lakeside following a serious accident. Belford Road in Dulwich, that's closed both ways between Underhill Road and Woodvale following a fire in a building this morning. In central London, it's very slow on Park Lane, that's northbound through the roadworks between Hyde Park Corner and Marble Arch. And the A308 in Hampton, it's slow both ways around Church Street as there are some temporary lights in place for roadworks there.
This is LBC.
I've used my ample time indoors to hunt down my odd socks. I found one down the sofa, one in the bread bin, and one in a serious relationship with my cat. But there are better ways to spend your time. That's why Money Supermarket is helping you find cheaper insurance, better interest rates, and easier ways to manage your bills. You can find many more small steps towards money car at Money Supermarket.
LBC.
At Vodafone, we know how important it is to stay connected. Whether you're keeping the family entertained at home or staying close to loved ones far away. That's why we've lowered the price of our fastest broadband to just £22.95 a month. So switch to Vodafone Superfast Broadband and stay connected for less. Available online today, keeping the UK connected. Ready? Vodafone.
24-month contract, credit check, acceptance and price rise may apply. Superfast average speeds from 35 megabits per second. Vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
Working with government and National Rail, TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. We're in this together and you have a vital part to play. Continue working from home if you can. Avoid public transport to allow those that must use it to do so safely. Walk or cycle to work if you can. We're adding cycleways and widening pavements to help. If you must travel, travel off-peak, especially in the mornings. For those who must use public transport, it is now very different. Follow national social distancing measures of 2 metres wherever possible. Wear a face covering over your nose and mouth and wash your hands before and after travel. Our services are regularly cleaned with hospital-grade antiviral disinfectant for everyone's safety. And we're providing hand sanitizer across the public transport network to help reduce the spread of the virus. Thank you for your help. Search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every day.
We're all juggling a lot at the moment. Take me. I'd normally be making a documentary right now, but at home, I've had to become my parents' questionable IT consultant, a glitchy virtual colleague and a distinctly average quiz show host. Which is why BT assembled some of the nation's favourite faces for a series of tech how-tos on homeschooling, digital well-being, working from home, online safety, video calling and more. To watch these guides, search BT Tech Tips. BT, beyond limits.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet @LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
The Boris Johnson press conference is postponed until 7 p.m. That's because Dominic Cummings, giving his sort of own press conference extraordinarily as an unelected advisor in the garden in Downing Street, didn't finish till 20 to 6. They're going to want to make sure Boris does not contradict the account that Dominic Cummings has given. And I'm asking you, did he convince you with what he had to say? And does that mean he should now stay in post? Brian is relentingly unforgiving. He chose not to take medical advice before travel. He chose not to stay at home, save lives and protect the NHS. He chose not to speak to anyone, including the PM. He went back to work when he wasn't fit, brackets poor eyesight, wife unwell, resigned Dom. Steve in Plymouth says Boris could have boxed clever and suspended him straight away and brought him back in the autumn. By then, the matter would be seen to be trivial. That's probably right, Steve, but you know, there's a very key moment coming up because whilst we've left the European Union, we're in a transition period. If we're going to extend that transition period, that notice has to be given in before the 1st of July. So next month is, in terms of Brexit and where we are in the world, a very, very important time. Why didn't Dominic Cummings just say in retrospect he maybe should have acted differently? He could have redeemed himself with a simple apology. Honesty is the best policy. Sally and Hull, I'd rather he'd done that. I'd rather he said, look, I'm in a slightly lucky position. I had the choice. I felt for the family we'd be better off in Durham. I could have lived with that. I mean, I really could have lived with that. It would have been a breach of the rules. But hey, the Barnard Castle trip most clearly is a breach of the rules, however you look at it. Cummings rules OK. Witch hunt, lynch party, methinks, says Chris in Manchester. Fran, he should go. The sooner the better. But Martin says he comes across as a decent family man, not the demigod people portrayed him to be. Let us go to Melanie in Stratford-upon-Avon, a new caller. Good evening, Melanie.
Good evening.
So what did you make of his explanations? I mean, was he believable?
I think he was authentic in his approach to everything. I think that he was trying to be honest. I mean, if you're living in London, you have an autistic son, you're being hounded by people. I think that was a damn good reason for him to up sticks and go down to his parents.
He had a better option, didn't he?
I also feel that, the situation is the one mistake he made was taking the drive, even though he did say he felt sick. That's why they stopped off and sat down. However, he got my full support. I think Boris needs him. He's not 100%. And I think that time will tell. But I would like him to stay because I think he's a breath of fresh air.
Melanie, I think the key to this, I mean, Boris Johnson clearly is prepared to tough this out and keep him. And there are about 20 Tory MPs who've called on him to go. And there was a lot of score settling going on yesterday. But also, Melanie, there was a huge amount of public anger. And there's nowhere better to get that sort of litmus test of where public opinion is than LBC, because 24/7 people are ringing in, giving comments, thoughts and opinions. And some of the anger on LBC last night and through today was really, really strong. And my feeling is, Melanie, if he's done enough to get people to think, well, what he did, it may not have been perfect, but you know what? It's not the end of the world. If he achieves that, he will stay in his job. I mean, do you feel, let me ask you, do you feel more kindly inclined towards him now than you did 2 hours ago?
Yes, I definitely do. I think that he came across very human. I think his concern, he's obviously a family man. I think he's been an idiot. I think he has a knee-jerk reaction. I think he has got arrogance, but who hasn't in a position like that have to have a certain self-protection as well. I think he didn't come clean to start with because I think he was fearful of the situation. Yes, I do think he slightly concocted his story to make sure it was right.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
He'd get a cross-examination.
Absolutely, yeah. But Melanie, yes. against that, he was in a privileged position. He was able to make this choice. I understand why he did it, but there are many, many others who'd like to have gone to second homes or families in the country that didn't do so. And of course, equally, the real anger, Melanie, that was coming through to LBC, people say, look, I haven't seen my grandparents. I couldn't go to, family funerals. I couldn't see people in hospital who were dying. And yet he thinks he can go and sit by a river, walk through the woods and drive up to Durham. That's been the anger, Melanie, hasn't it?
It has definitely. But I mean, walking the woods on private property is acceptable.
It is.
I walk my dogs. I go through woods. That's allowed. The situation with him going to Barnard Castle was I think silly. I think really not the idea of him going onto the motorway and driving back and then finding his eyesight's bad, he's just sick or whatever. A short trip, yes. It's all a bit of a mess up. But at the end of the day, he's human.
That was not a believable story. But Melanie, thank you very much indeed. And Melanie, who clearly was slightly impressed by him. And if public anger calms down, he will stay in his job. It's up to you, folks. Castle trip, unjustified. Otherwise, he might have got away with it. He has no case to answer and acted in defence of his family, says Robert. He should resign and go, say others. Let's go to Belfast and speak to Brenda. Brenda, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel, and let you know I'm a Brexiteer, so I don't have any political axe to grind. I'm approaching this basically on the analysis of his performance and the credibility of his evidence.
Yes.
He didn't comply with the rules. He knew what the rules were. What he did instead was what suited him best and what his preference was. I mean, that is clear.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But is that a capital offence, Brenda?
No, it's not a capital offence. He also is trying to behave reasonably or appear to behave reasonably by saying he is contrite about some other non-specified areas which he would make clear at a later date relating to the pandemic, but he would not apologise to this particular event because he didn't concede he'd broken the rules. And I think that's a major mistake. One of the things that I think is highlighted is that he made a great emphasis on the medical opinion to return meant he was not a danger at that point to the public. There's an implied reference there that he was a danger on the outbound journey up to his parents.
Absolutely. Flat tyre or the need to get petrol or the 4-year-old.
He could have been incapacitated during that time. I also wonder what kind of judgment. If your wife is already sick, why would you take her on that long journey? You'd have been better sitting it out at home. There's always help, whether it's emergency service or other facility. If he hasn't got enough contacts in his position, there's something wrong. I don't believe he's a Billy No-Mates, no matter what people might think of his personality.
He wanted to get out of London, didn't he?
Yes, I think that's what it was. He could think of an escape route. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so evasive. He's been evasive all this time, and I don't buy the argument either. I think it's inconceivable that he has not swapped stories with the MP, our Prime Minister. They're not just
let's hope
buddies,
the Prime Minister. Let's hope the Prime Minister gets the story straight at 7:00, because detail is not always Boris's strongest point. Brenda, thank you. Going to go to West Sussex, to Rustington, to speak to Jenny. Good evening.
Yeah, hello, Nigel. An absolute Brexiteer, so we can get that one over. Well done, and thank you.
Well,
and we know where to go if they kick Dominic out.
And do you think, Jenny, and let's just talk about...
What do I think about this? I think the poor man actually... I wasn't very keen on him, but I was sitting there listening to him. He's probably more afraid of after a 4-year-old child than he was of the virus. And the fact that thought that his wife might not be able to look after his child probably motivated him to just go into overdrive.
Jenny, the line's rotten. The line's rotten. We will come back to you. Let's go to Red Ruth in Cornwall. Angie, a new caller. Angie, good evening.
Good evening to you, Nigel. First of all, I can't think how some of the callers to you are so gullible. Quite frankly, I think that every word that drips from his lips is a lie.
That's a bit strong, Angie, isn't it?
No, it isn't strong at all. I've always felt that Boris was just Cummings' mouthpiece. And I think, quite honestly, that if he wanted to test his eyesight and make sure he's suitable to drive, why would he take his wife and kiddie in the car?
I couldn't agree more. That didn't ring true. And Angie, had his parents had a farm just outside Red Ruth, and he tried to drive down to Cornwall, he'd have been stopped on the A30 and turned round, wouldn't he?
Have you seen our campaign to keep people out of Cornwall?
I know.
We have one hospital. I don't know how many hospitals Durham has, but if the kid was ill, as he says, and had to go to hospital, why didn't he stop in London? There's loads of hospitals in London. It could have gone to any one of those, not in Durham.
Yeah. I wonder, Angie, had he been stopped on the A1 by the police on the way up there, they probably would have said, go back to London, wouldn't they?
Well, one can only hope so. But as it was, that he didn't. But he decided that it was great to go up all that way to his elderly relative, I'm not certain who, mother or whatever, who apparently was 70. And then he said his niece was 20. And then he said she was 17. So, again, what is it? I mean, it's complete rubbish. And I don't believe a single word. And I never have liked the man. And I think he's just an arrogant person who, quite frankly, needs to go straight away.
Right. And Angie, can I ask whether you're a Remainer or a Leaver?
Nigel, I came to see you when you were at Camborne.
Yep.
I waved me little Brexit sign, and we cheered and stomped, and we said, "Oggy, oggy, oggy."
Right, you're a Brexiteer. Angie, thank you very much indeed for that one. On that note, it is 6:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watts.
Dominic Cummings has said he doesn't regret his decision to drive from London to Durham during the coronavirus lockdown. In a media briefing in Downing Street, Boris Johnson's chief aide said he was acting within the rules. Mr. Cummings insisted he and his wife were in exceptional circumstances because they required childcare. He did admit to driving to Barnard Castle, a 30-mile journey, to test if he was well enough to return to London. Labour says the British people were looking for an apology from Mr. Cummings but got none. Opposition parties and some backbench Conservatives have been calling for his resignation. This evening's weather: mostly clear skies with a few patches of fog, cloudier with the odd shower in the Midlands, north of England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. A low of 4 Celsius.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
Sticking to that date of June the 1st for some years in primary schools, and indeed moving further, a couple of secondary years as of June the 15th. And Education Secretary, obviously Conservative MP Gavin Williamson, who joins me now. I read some regional holdouts. What are you going to do about that?
Well, we expect all schools to be opening their doors, welcoming children in. Where schools have got practical problems and they've got issues, our doors open. We're working with them to work around those problems.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With Xero. Get your business digital ready with Xero accounting software.
LBC.
At NatWest, we're putting our money where your business is. We've set aside £5 billion of working capital funding for our customers and have already lent over $3 billion to businesses like yours. So if you bank with NatWest and COVID-19 has affected your business, remember, every one of us is here to support you. Search NatWest Business Coronavirus.
Figures for RBS Group. Security may be required. Over 18s only. Subject to status. Business use only.
We're all juggling a lot at the moment. Take me. I'd normally be making a documentary right now, but at home, I've had to become my parents' questionable IT consultant, a glitchy virtual colleague and a distinctly average quiz show host. Which is why BT assembled some of the nation's favourite faces for a series of tech how-tos on homeschooling, digital well-being, working from home, online safety, video calling and more. To watch these guides, search BT Tech Tips. BT, beyond limits.
My name is Donya. I moved to Manchester in 2010. I came from Afghanistan. The first school day was a bit tough. I had no friends, couldn't speak English and felt a bit left out. My high school teacher was very supportive. She matched me up with friends that spoke the same language as me. Having friends gave me a lot of confidence. I felt like I'm not being left out.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. Get free one-to-one support with our teacher training advisors to get one step closer to the classroom. Subject to eligibility. Search Get Into Teaching.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC.
Do I detect a slight change of mood? That some of the absolute outright anger that it appeared that Dominic Cummings could do the hell what he wants, whilst the rest of us were virtually being put under house arrest, certainly by some local police forces, and the sheer outrage of that over the last 24 hours. And somehow, even though the story isn't wholly believable, that somehow people are a little bit more sympathetic towards him now than they were a couple of hours ago. That's the sense that I've got. Let's see. Let's go to Robert in Dorking, a new caller. Robert, good evening.
Good evening to you, sir. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So,
I think we're missing a point here. There's an elephant in the room.
Ah.
Yeah. I think the point of the operation was serving his son's best interest. His 4-year-old son had to be cared for. Am I right?
Are you telling me, Robert, that
one of the most... Because he put him in the car, drove him an extremely long distance that resulted in the son having to go to hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Not very sharp, that is it. Bearing in mind that this is a man who is responsible for making decisions and advising the government. I mean, he spent a lot of time on the interview going on about all the mistakes that he makes.
Well, the mistakes, yes. I mean, he did say they'd made mistakes. He'd made mistakes in handling the pandemic, but he would talk about that later. But he felt, but there were no apologies for Durham or Barnard. The other point, Robert, that I could, I mean, and I get your point about the initial journey, but if you're worried about your eyesight, gosh, I'm not really sure about my eyesight.
Well, I know.
Why would you then put the wife and kid in the car and drive?
Well, there you are. I think that the whole thing is strewn with sort of, well, I won't say lies, but sort of misinterpretations of the actual facts of the matter, and why nobody has addressed this issue of the child's best interest and ending up in hospital in Durham. Well, that's not very sharp at all.
Well, he tried to turn that to his advantage, you could argue. Robert, would it have been better if he'd said, look, I thought it would be a lot more comfortable for us, particularly as it looked like we might get ill, to be up on my parents' farm in Durham than to be in London? Wouldn't that have been a sort of more honest answer?
It would, but then you look at the fallout that is the consequence of this, and again, bearing in mind that the man is responsible for advising the government, it's very good advice at all.
Well,
he's made an appalling decision.
I mean, if he said, look, it was Easter Sunday. We went out for a couple of hours. We drove to Barnard Castle. We sat by a river. We walked through a bit of wood. We didn't contact. We didn't break social distance rules. It's just what we did on Easter Sunday. Would people really mind that much?
Well,
I wouldn't.
If he was an upfront sort of chap, he wouldn't have been put on the spot in this way, maybe.
Yeah, I just think being a bit more upfront about particularly the Barnard Castle trip, I'd have said, hey, do you know what? Let's move on. That would have been my view. But Robert, you make a good point about the fact the boy got ill, and maybe that journey was part of it. Let's go to David in Burnham-on-Sea, a new caller. David, good evening.
Hello, good evening, Nigel.
So, have you warmed a bit to him?
Not at all. Well, to Cummings, no, not at all.
Right,
not
go
at
on.
all.
Tell me why.
But, I'll tell you why, because this is a man who is employed by the government, namely Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is his boss.
Yes.
If he's done anything at all wrong, the only person he has to answer to is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson's responsible for him being there. He should never, ever have been hung out to dry at a press conference like that. He's an employee. The employer has a responsibility to all their employees. He should never have been allowed to do it. Boris Johnson is a spineless waste of space.
Well,
he should have stuck up for him. He should have looked after him. He should have said, I'm happy with what he said. If you don't like it, tough. I'll stick up for him and I'm supporting him. But instead of that, he's just hung him out to dry. And I actually feel sorry for Cummings and his family now, because he's got to go home to that again.
So oh yeah, I mean, all of that is, and some of us have lived through bits of that, David, I can assure you, I wouldn't recommend it too much. It's not much fun. But you think this is all because of Boris's weakness, do you? That this event happened today?
I think he's an absolutely appalling leader. If he's going to lead this country, he's got to lead it. You don't lead it by saying, get out there and explain it.
I bet you didn't vote for him, David, did you?
Boris, no, not at all.
Not at all. No, well, there you are. Thank you very much. No, that's fine, David. I've got to move on. I've got your view. It's very clear. Let's go to Merseyside and speak to Phil in St Helens. Phil, welcome to the show. New caller.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello there. So, did he do well tonight?
I think he did very well, Cummings, to be honest with you. He explained all the situations, but the trouble is, I don't think it's going to end it. It's just left too many open questions. And if Boris thought this was going to be the end, I don't think it is.
But the media, Phil, the media didn't really bash him to the floor, did they? Not quite.
Well, they didn't ask him a lot of really searching questions, but I just think that, Boris said last night that the stories of him going to Barnard Castle were lies, basically. But then today, he's come out and admitted it was true. So if Boris him to the hill,
I mean, Boris ignored the Barnard Castle question last night, just totally ignored it. Then there was some confusion over the police. Phil, yeah, I mean, so you think this just rolls on and on, do you?
It's going to roll on because he's not even. The biggest problem he's got is he's not even said any bit of sorry or any touch of contrition, and that's what is going to stick in the crowd of most people, Nigel.
Yeah, I think a bit of contrition would have helped. I agree with that. Phil, thank you very much indeed for your call. This is all about Brexit. Almost all of the people complaining about Cummings are Remainers. Well, not quite true. Not quite true. I get it. I get there are some in the Remain camp who want to see him gone. That would see Boris weakened. That would make the chance of transition being extended that much greater. But it's not absolutely as black and white as that. On Twitter, he broke the rules multiple times. Whatever the reason, he should apologise and resign. No one is above the law. On Twitter, Nick says, Farage piling onto Cummings. I'm shocked. Shocked, I tell you. I'm not. I'm trying to be objective about it. I'm saying I thought he did okay. I don't believe what he said, but I don't think it's a capital offence. And his fate will be in the hands of the British public. If by the weekend this has given Boris disastrous approval ratings, Cummings will be gone. But maybe he's done enough tonight to turn the mood a little. Let's go to Catherine in Teddington, a new caller. Good evening. Catherine, good evening.
Hello.
Hi there. So, what did you make of it?
I'm furious with him. He should have fessed up straight away and said, yes, I made a mistake and I apologise deeply from the bottom of my heart and I will never let it happen again. And what's he done? He's done a mealy-mouthed excuse. He's just shocking.
Had he apologised, Catherine, would that have been enough to allow him to stay in his job?
I think that if he had apologised and said, I'm really sorry and I messed up and it was a bad thing I did and I will never do it again, whatever. But to come up with an excuse like this is pathetic. And also, what is Boris going to say now? How is Boris going to handle this? I am waiting to see because if Boris supports him, Boris is in a mess.
Well, Boris will support him. In fact,
he can't. He has to.
Boris
he has to.
Catherine, Boris said last night he thought Dominic Cummings had behaved with integrity.
Oh!
It's not going to win you over, is it?
Do you have any idea? This is not integrity. This is a kind of a monster. This is just terrible. This is terrible for our politics. It's terrible for Boris. It's terrible for all of us. We need to have people showing that they can actually fess up to something and say, yes, I've made a mistake, yes, and I won't do it again. What is our society going to be worth if we don't have people in power admitting a mistake? What are we worth as a society?
Well, I've got some sympathy for that. I have to say, Catherine, that I've been praising, unusually for me, President Macron, who gave an address to the French nation and said, look, I'm sorry, I've made some mistakes in this crisis, I didn't read it right. And I think just sometimes a bit of honesty is very helpful. Catherine, thank you for your call and your passion. Goodness me. Morris is calling from Bromley. Good evening, Morris.
Yes, good evening. Now, maybe I'm Italian and I think of family in a different way, but the guy seems a normal guy. He was even stammering, like he would expect a normal guy to do in front of all this press. He's actually, my question is, how many people having to choose between a rule and the safety of the family, how many people go for the rule?
Morris, millions over the... Hang on, Morris, over the course of this lockdown, millions of people have put obeying the rules first and family second, and they are the ones...
In this case, it's safeguarding of a child.
But they are the ones... Well, arguably the child would have been safer not being driven 260 miles up the A1, Morris.
This is a choice. This is only for social services and the police to ask. Nobody can come here and ask me about what I do with my child unless they are the social services and police. Everybody else, they have no idea.
But Morris, huge numbers of people would love to have had the option that Dominic Cummings had and would love to have gone to different parts of the country for lockdown or for periods of illness, but they didn't do it because they were told they shouldn't do it.
But he had to explain. He went through all these details. He took a decision, and who can go and ask and decide if this is the right decision or not? How can you tell? We were not there.
So you're convinced, Morris, by his sincerity.
I don't see any major evidence that says this is all a set-up And actually, you must have seen the scenes outside the house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've been through something similar here in Kent. When
Yeah.
people are thrown at you like dogs, you know, of course you don't want this guy to resign. Otherwise, next time they would send even more dogs to the next guy.
Morris, I understand all of that. I just wish look, you're convinced by his argument he was acting in the interests of his son, and you believe that sincerely, and I thank you for it. And actually, quite a few of you, I think, have been convinced by that argument. Daniel says he's a father first, a government advisor second. We should encourage strong fathers to take actions in the best interests of their children. Quite a lot of you are convinced by the argument he did it for the interests of his son. And if he's convinced people that that is the reason that he took this action and that was reasonable action to take, then maybe, as I said a quarter of an hour ago, I do detect a slight softening in the overall level of anger towards Dominic Cummings. It's 6:45. Time for the news headlines with Thomas Watts.
Dominic Cummings has insisted his journey from London to Durham during the lockdown was made in exceptional circumstances. Labour says it's clear there is one rule for Boris Johnson's closest advisor and another for everybody else. A further 121 people have died in the UK after testing positive for the virus, taking the total to 36,914. This evening, cloud and patchy rain in northern and central areas, clear spells elsewhere, a low of 4 Celsius.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
At 7, we'll cross live to Downing Street for the Prime Minister's press conference. Then we'll get your reaction for 2 hours to what he and Dominic Cummings have said.
Ian Dale on LBC.
At HMRC, we're working hard to fight tax scams during the coronavirus pandemic. Here's how you can also protect yourself. Be alert. Think before parting with your information or money. Be calm. It's okay to refuse requests. If you feel rushed, it could be a scam. Be secure. Tell HMRC and your bank if you think you've been a victim. Remember, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. For more information, search scams on gov.uk.
Hello? This is the most important piece of advice I'm going to give you in your life.
Hello? What was that, Dad? Hello? Dad, I can't even hear you, man.
You get me?
I didn't get it, Dad.
You didn't get it?
I meant...
You didn't...
Hello?
Don't speak plain English. You want to answer me back?
I'm answering you back.
You think your father is a... I am not going to repeat myself.
Oh, man.
Tired of bad connections? Enjoy great quality calls with Boss Revolution, the international calling app. Download the Boss Revolution app today and get £2 free call credit.
At NatWest, we're putting our money where your business is. We've set aside £5 billion of working capital funding for our customers and have already lent over $3 billion to businesses like yours. So if you bank with NatWest and COVID-19 has affected your business, remember, every one of us is here to support you. Search NatWest Business Coronavirus.
Figures for RBS Group. Security may be required. Over 18s only. Subject to status. Business use only.
We're all juggling a lot at the moment. Take me. I'd normally be making a documentary right now, but at home, I've had to become my parents' questionable IT consultant, a glitchy virtual colleague, and a distinctly average quiz show host. Which is why BT assembled some of the nation's favourite faces for a series of tech how-tos on homeschooling, digital well-being, working from home, online safety, video calling, and more. To watch these guides, search BT Tech Tips. BT, Beyond Limits.
This is a message from the government. There is new guidance to help businesses and employees who cannot work from home be COVID-19 secure at work. The advice will help you conduct a risk assessment, put social distancing measures in place, improve hygiene and cleaning in the workplace, and look after the well-being of your employees. Every workplace is different. Use the guidance to make your business COVID-19 secure. Access the support you need at gov.uk/working-safely. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC, The Nigel Farage Show.
Well, that was the latest government information advert, and of course the big one that we've had, the biggest one over these last couple of months, is stay at home. And Dominic Cummings didn't stay at home, but there is a little break clause in there that talks about following the advice to the best of your ability if you are living with children. And that is the defence, if you like, that Dominic Cummings is claiming. I think the other story here is that because an unelected official made a speech, it's now put our PM's address to the nation about lockdown back by an hour. It shows strange priorities. What happened to the good example that should be set to others? Mars, one or two, people who are sort of behavioural specialists say that by Dominic Cummings doing this, it means many more of the rest of us will just say the hell with lockdown. And that was certainly some of the gut reaction we got yesterday and through today. I think a little bit of that will have eased tonight. I may be wrong. Ultimately, Boris Johnson will not want to let him go. He will go if that public anger continues. If it subsides, he will stay. I think it's as simple as that. Dave in Derby is a new caller. Dave, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine. It's interesting. I think the line about, the family and a child, some people think it's nonsense, but quite a lot of people think there was a certain sincerity in that.
Yeah, there could have well been a bit of sincerity behind it all, but I think the problem is that I don't like to bring money into things, but the fact that they're a wealthy family,
yes.
When there's people living on the breadline where I'm self-employed, I might have just had a grant through, but for weeks there's uncertainty. We've got children. My mum, my father's 84. My mum's 76. She was in hospital. No one's allowed to go anywhere near her when she's in there.
Yeah, of course.
So she's in there on her own. We've stayed at home. All the families stayed at home. And then you see that there's a gentleman that's part of the government, part of the plan, that just takes it upon himself. Well, Dave, to swan around and
Dave, we saw
the
same thing with Robert Jenrick, didn't we? Who's a government minister.
We did, yeah.
House in London, constituency in the East Midlands, holiday home, basically, out in Herefordshire. And yet he did that, went to stay in Herefordshire, and he was allowed to stay. The truth of it is, Dave, the better off you are, the more choices you have.
No, that is true. That is so true.
That
is so true. But if there's a pandemic, then surely the choices are taken away. If the choice is taken away to the person with not much money, surely the same choices are taken away to the person with money if everybody's supposed to be locked down
in a sense,
and doing what the system's told.
Well, in a sense, that's the argument we're having, Dave, isn't it, really?
Or otherwise they're saying that when there's trouble in the world, if you've got money, you live by this rule and we'll put something on the TV for the, I don't like to say it, but for the plebs to listen to, and they'll take your advice and do what you ask them to do.
Do you think, Dave? Do you think? And I can tell that you're pretty frustrated with this. Do you think he's going to survive this in his position?
Yeah, I do. I've got no doubt whatsoever that he'll survive it.
Okay, because
they always do. They always do survive. It takes so much to get people to get people away, and then even if they did get rid of him, they'd probably only bring him back into a lesser post with the same influence. Through a back door somewhere.
Yes, that was one option open to Boris. He could sort of shuffle him sideways and bring him back. Dave,
that's what it is.
Yeah, I know. Dave, thank you. And I remember in the referendum campaign in Vote Leave, I was phoned by a couple of really senior people in Vote Leave to say Cummings will be sacked this morning. He has caused such upset and division within the camp. Many of us disagree with some of his election strategies. He'll be gone. And I expected to hear that lunchtime that Cummings would be sacked. But when he was faced with being sacked, he basically threatened to bring the whole thing down if they sacked him, and he stayed. So he has been sacked a few times, but he's very, very good at fighting not to be sacked. Let's go to Enfield and speak to Abu, new to the show. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
So, did you find him convincing?
To be honest with you, what I'm going to say to you is not about him being convincing or not. I think all he had to say was, look, I'm a parent with a disabled child. I've seen what's happened with Corona. He was very close to the PM, obviously, as we are all discussing. But I've seen what's happening, and I panicked. The only way I felt that was safest for my child to be looked after was by going and staying closer to my parents. I think 99% of the UK population would have forgiven him. He is an extremely wealthy, his parents are extremely wealthy. They do own an estate and they do have quite a few cottages there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different issue. He's not telling everybody all of these things.
Well, it gave him more choice, Abu, didn't it, really?
It did. I mean, there's people, Nigel, I'm not going to be boastful, but I have friends who own helicopters and they don't even need to take they don't even, need to take a cab or take a car ride or do this or do that. They can take a plane and fly over to another country within seconds of making a decision. But the problem is, he is a very valuable asset to the... And listen, just in case people think I'm a Conservative supporter, I am a hardline Labour supporter, Nigel. I did vote against you in the last election.
And are you a Remainer too?
To be honest with you, I thought remaining was the best option. In terms of, we're going to divert the conversation, Nigel.
No, because what I'm asking you is some of the press aggression towards Cummings, because so much of the press is still in their hearts Remain?
99% of the press are Remain, Nigel.
I know that.
You and Boris Johnson. I'm not going to give my full name, otherwise you can see on Twitter the day you succeeded. I said they both. I won't mention what I said, but in terms of
it's before the watershed.
I said Boris and Nigel have won the game, but they have no plan of what's going to happen next. And unfortunately, that was a reality. Nobody knew what Brexit meant, and unfortunately, we still don't.
Well, I tell you what, Abu, I could retort by saying no one knew what Remain went, but hey, listen, thank you. I'm going to move on. I want to get a couple more calls in. Trevor is calling from Tenderton in Kent, and there's a new caller. Trevor, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call.
Not one bit. So, has he convinced you that he's fit to stay in position?
No, in no way, shape or form has he convinced me or my family. The man has done a script. He's thought about it. He's had time to think about it. He's practiced it, and he's performed this stunt, this spin, really. And taken into account, was he investigated by the police, like you were investigated for investigating illegal immigrants coming across the channel, twice by the police, I might add. And there we are with a chap who went up the country. You just were in Kent. He hasn't been investigated one bit. So what's going on?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, the spin machine that you mentioned, it's happening. So they've basically, what they've now done since the Cummings press conference, Trevor, is they've told Tory MPs to tweet, "It's time to move on. Detailed and fair explanation of events, in my view, time to move on." There's a lot of spin around, Trevor, isn't there?
There is an absolute lot of spin. I mean, I'm a retired man of 68. I've been around the block. I've seen things, And the thing is, I can't believe this chap, and I cannot believe Boris as well. As much as he saw the Brexit through, I cannot believe what's going on here at the moment. I've locked down with my family all these weeks, done what I was told to do, and we're being absolutely kicked in the butt over this.
Is that how it feels?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Had he apologised, Trevor?
Has he?
No, I'm just going to ask you hypothetically. Had he apologised, would you have felt a bit more sympathetic?
He would have been. It would have been a little bit better for the people to hear that. But really, it's all too late, isn't it? He's insulted the people who have died. He's insulted the relatives who have lost loved ones, and it's all too late, really.
But is he a good father, Trevor? Because
he may be a good father. I don't know. He may be a good father, and he put a good spin on this. But it would appear to me he wasn't ill. He hasn't had a diagnosis to say he was ill. So can we believe that?
Well, Trevor, these questions will go on for days and days and days. Thank you all of you for your very, very instant reaction to that extraordinary event of an unelected advisor doing a press conference in the gardens of Downing Street. He was composed. He was cool. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't sneer at the media. Some of the stories weren't particularly believable, but I think he may just come across as being a little bit more likeable to some of you than he was before. I don't know. The next few days and public opinion will determine his fate. Boris Johnson very shortly will give his reaction too. I'm back tomorrow at 6 p.m. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. Right now, it's Ian Dale.